Going through the Buccaneers defense and how they stack up against defenses in years past, especially that of Todd Bowles. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this Friday edition of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code LockedOnNFL, all one word, all lowercase, to win $50 instantly when you play $5. For those of you that didn't hear my offensive review, go back to the last episode. I break it all down, talk about the players, their performances, how they rank in Buccaneers history. But it's time to go through the defensive side of the ball. And, you know, there's no easy way to say this. Buckle up. This is not going to be pretty. This is not going to be nearly as much fun as talking about the offense, but the 2024 Buccaneers defense finished 18th in total defense, 29th in passing defense, 4th in rushing defense, and 16th in scoring defense, allowing 22.6 points per game. On a side note, the Bucs beat the teams ranked 1st, 2nd, and 7th in scoring defense while taking the 4th ranked scoring defense to overtime on the road. Just, fun little tidbit there. But compare this defense to just last year when the Buccaneers finished 7th in total defense. They were still 29th in passing, 5th in rushing, 7th in scoring. The pass defense has been bad the last 2 seasons. There's no doubt about that, but injuries certainly played a role in that. But it goes beyond just the last 2 years. Look, in 2022, the Bucs were 9th in passing defense. Cool, great. That's nice. They were 13th in scoring defense, not quite as good. But then you go to 2021, 21st in passing defense, 5th in scoring defense. In 2020, 21st in pass defense, 8th in scoring defense. And then Todd Bowles' first year with the Buccaneers in 2019, the Bucs were 30th in pass defense and 29th in scoring defense. So you kind of see where they started versus where they are now. But what is the big difference between the years like the lone season that the Bucs had a top 10 passing defense under Bowles versus all of these other ones? That's the thing. I kept digging and digging and digging, and I couldn't find the reason. I couldn't find something to point to and say, that's where the difference was. That's what they're missing in this defense. There's no rhyme or reason. There's no discernible difference between that 2022 season and all the others. In fact, 2022 was the lowest team sack total of any year under Bowles when they only had 44 sacks as a team. This year, they had 46. The other seasons under Bowles were either 47 or 48. Turnover differential, the Bucs were -2 in turnover differential in 2022. In 2019, when Jameis had 30 interceptions, the differential was -13. In 2020, they were at +8. 2021, +10. 2023, +8. This season, it was -5, with the defense getting just 18 takeaways. Even according to PFF's premium stats, every year under Todd Bowles, the corners and safeties are in man coverage on average less than 25% of the snaps throughout the season through Bowles' entire tenure. So why the disparity? Why the glaring difference between 2022 in all the other seasons? I'm going to answer that question with another question. If you are consistently ranking in the bottom third in the league in pass defense with one outlier year, and you're still running the same scheme, why haven't you changed? The sacks haven't changed all that much. The turnovers haven't changed all that much, although the turnover differential has. But why is the defense constantly doing the same thing year in and year out that have had, by and large, the same results the entire time Bowles has been with the team? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the crux at the heart of the fire Todd Bowles argument. The personnel changes, the scheme doesn't, but neither do the results. This team has changed out corners, they've changed out safeties, linebackers, edge rushers, and the pass defense is still giving up tons of yards every game. So why would you look at the offense that I broke down on the last show and then look at this defense and think, we should definitely let the guy who had an all-time year running the offense go while we keep the guy that finishes 23rd on average in pass defense in a passing league, where the rules favor the quarterback and the receiver in every conceivable way. This is not my stance or my soapbox to fire Todd Bowles, but this truly is the argument that I think many are intending to make when they talk about why Coen is the person that should stay while Todd Bowles is the person that should be let go. They bring up his overall record as a head coach. They bring up his overall record as just the Buccaneers coach. They bring up the soft coverage. They bring up struggling against rookie and backup quarterbacks. They bring up barely winning a weak division 3 years in a row. But this is what it really boils down to. The fact that no matter how much things change, they continuously stay the same. And in a passing league, you cannot continuously finish in the bottom third, a lot of times in the bottom, quarter of the NFL in pass defense and expect to compete for a championship. I like Todd. And I don't think the Bucs win a Super Bowl if he's not their defensive coordinator. He was masterful in Super Bowl 55 against the Chiefs, who ran his defense through the ringer earlier that season. He has had schemes and game plans that have been absolutely spectacular. But then the Bucs have lost numerous games because of how beatable his defense is. Think back to the Houston Texans game last year and the absolute collapse that the defense had. Think back to both of the Falcons games this year. Think back to the divisional round against the Los Angeles Rams in 2021. At the end of the day, this is what has Bucs fans worried about Liam Coen getting a head coaching job. Maybe Coen is a crappy head coach. We don't know right now. But I think more Bucs fans are willing to take that risk than to stay with the current status quo, which is a coach getting just far enough to not lose his job, but likely not be the guy that's going to get you back to the mountaintop. When you have that potential guy sitting right under your nose and being of interest to other teams around the league. That's the long and the short of it. And no matter how hard I tried, I could not find any correlating information between why Todd Bowles had a top 10 pass defense just 2 years ago in his first season as head coach versus all of these other finishes in the 20s, including 1 at 30, 2 at 29, and then this past season where they finished, this year he finished 29th. So 3 29th finishes in the league in pass defense. Doesn't matter if you have Carlton Davis. Doesn't matter if you have prime Shaq Barrett and Jason Pierre-Paul. Doesn't matter if you have Ndamukong Suh or Kalijah Kancey. None of it matters. The Bucs are who they are in the pass game. And no matter what, it just doesn't seem to change. Which defensive players stood out the most this season? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's playoff time, and if you're like me, you want to make the most of these final weeks of football action. That's where PrizePicks comes in. If you love football and want a chance to win real money while watching the games, PrizePicks is the place for you. It's the best way to turn your sports opinions into cash with daily fantasy player projections. With PrizePicks, you simply pick more or less on a player's stats, like total passing yards or rushing touchdowns, and for a shot to win up to 1,000 times your money. You can make your picks in less than 60 seconds. And whether you're looking for a flex play to boost your payout or you want to cash out quickly, PrizePicks has got you covered. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, it's clear that people are absolutely loving this. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, all lowercase, all one word, to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 instantly when you play just $5. PrizePicks, run your game. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. And, the new Locked On NFL is here, and it's 2 shows every day. The Madman Tyler Rowland is going to kick off your morning. Then you can stop by the barbershop with Tony Wiggins for some real NFL talk. You add in the Locked On local experts, and you get unprecedented NFL insight, hot opinions, detailed breakdowns, all in 30 minutes. It's the new Locked On NFL, and it's twice a day. So make it your second listen at the new Locked On NFL on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Despite the defense having an overall rough season, there were some players that I think deserve some praise. For starters, I'm going to talk about Zyon McCollum. Now, there was some concern, of course, with Zyon becoming a full-time starter this season after the Bucs traded away Carlton Davis. But I truly think that he answered the call. No, he didn't get the 6 interceptions that he wanted or said that, were his goal this season, but he did finish as the Buccaneers' top corner this year, and he had career best marks in reception percentage, interceptions, pass breakups, and yards after catch allowed per reception. He allowed the same amount of receptions this season as he did last season while being on the field for 284 more snaps this year. Again, big time improvement out of Zyon McCollum. And I'll be talking about the Buccaneers corner situation a lot in the coming weeks and months, but I think the Bucs have a really solid, reliable outside corner in Zyon for the foreseeable future. Another guy that had a really good season quietly was Yaya Diaby, and he didn't have the sack totals that we were hoping for. He finished with just 6, but he was one of the best players in the NFL in pass rush win rate among edge rushers, winning 25% of his battles. That put him in the top 20 in the NFL. Those numbers do need to go up for sure, but it was a big step forward for him. The difference between where he is and then reaching the top 10 in that win rate is less than 4%. So he's really not far off. These guys in the top 20 are just all clumped together. And he also had the most snaps of anyone in the top 20, which means reaching and maintaining that win rate was a lot harder for him than some of the other guys in the top 20. I mean, there were only 2 other players in the top 20 that had more than 500 defensive snaps this season, and that was Jared Verse from the Rams and then Trey Hendrickson from the Cincinnati Bengals. He had fewer sacks than last year, but his hurries, tackles for loss all went up, and his missed tackle percentage went down. Those are all signs that he is getting better. We just need to see those sack numbers get back up to where they were last year and even beyond so that he can get into the double digits. He was doing a lot basically on his own. There wasn't another edge rush threat that was going to be able to come in and take some of the pressure off of him. So a lot of teams were overloading the side of the offensive line where Yaya was lining up because they weren't worried about Chris Braswell. They weren't worried about Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. They weren't as worried as they probably should have been with Anthony Nelson at times. But you get an alpha in there. You get another top tier edge rush guy. Evan talked on Wednesday about his bold prediction being that the Bucs trade for Max Crosby or for Trey Hendrickson. You get one of those guys on the other side, Yaya's going to come away with 15 sacks. And if he doesn't, the other guy will. So, yeah, it's hard to be the lone guy. You have to be, all worldly in order to put up those kinds of numbers when you're by yourself. But, Yaya had a really, really solid year. Lavonte David, he was outstanding. Of course, Vita Vea was good. Kalijah Cansey was good. But my most disappointing this season was Antoine Winfield Jr. He was a disappointment for sure. But let's go through it a little bit. And I know there are people ready to make Antoine walk the plank, and they're furious with how he performed. They think he's overpaid, all these things. Winfield played in just 9 games this season. That was by far his fewest in a season since being drafted. He missed weeks 2 through 5 and then weeks 15 through 18. But he was never at 100% after week 1. It was his worst graded season of his career, according to PFF, in his overall defensive grade, his run defense grade, and his coverage grade. The only grade that they gave him that was higher than a career low was his pass rush grade. He flat out was not himself this past season, and a big reason for that was the injuries. Now, there were still some all-pro plays that he made that should have had big impacts in games. The forced fumble of Kyle Pitts in the home game against Atlanta, that very clearly prevented a touchdown and then was subsequently ruled a touchdown, despite even the bad camera angle showing that Antoine knocked that ball out of Pitt's hand before he crossed the goal line. Then, the fastest forward progress has been stopped whistle in history, and a non-reviewable play prevented his strip and recovery at a crucial moment in a wild card game against the Washington Commanders last week. Again, game-changing play right there. We may be giving a final preview episode for the Bucs and the Eagles right now, had the officials actually honored the way that play went and given Antoine Winfield Jr. his fumble recovery. It should be reviewable. If it was reviewable, they would have seen that ball was coming out before his forward progress was stopped, but I digress. This was a down year for Antoine Winfield Jr. There's absolutely no getting around that. There's no sugarcoating it. It was a disappointing season from, the highest paid player in the secondary in the NFL. But there's also no need to panic or think that he's going to become complacent because he got his bag. I think we're in for a huge bounce back year from him in 2025. And then speaking of injuries, I do think that they played a huge role in a lot of the defensive struggles this season. I know I'm going to miss some guys, but listen to this list for just a moment. Winfield, Whitehead, Edwards, Cansey, Britt, Russell, Dean, Zyon, Tyke, Bryce Hall, Servassier Dennis, Christian Izzy, and Vita Vea, they all dealt with injuries and missed time this season. Some more important than others, but all of it played a factor, whether that was the cohesion and the trust among the guys on the defensive side of the ball, whether it was overall talent, whether it was ability, whether it was understanding the defensive scheme and the game plan and making sure that you were in the right place or you were where you were supposed to be, whatever the case may be. There was a lot to overcome on that defensive side of the ball this year, and they simply didn't have anywhere close to the skilled enough reserve players in order to overcome those injuries. And while that's, again, not an excuse for the poor play, it certainly is a reason that factored into why the defense wasn't as good as it probably should have been and definitely could have been. Putting a bow on the defensive conversation by discussing their future. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. This is a message from our sponsor, Inuit TurboTax. Are you tired of the endless waiting, wondering, and worrying about your taxes? Well, now that's a thing of the past. You see, taxes don't need to be complicated or stressful. TurboTax is here to change the game by matching you with a TurboTax expert who can get to work on your return right away. No more waiting for answers. No more wondering if you're missing out on deductions. Whether you've got one form or 20, TurboTax experts give your taxes their undivided attention while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on what really matters. You won't have to lift a finger, but you'll get peace of mind knowing that your taxes are being handled by the pros. Ready for stress-free taxes and the most money back guaranteed? Head over to TurboTax.com today and get matched with your expert who's ready to take your taxes off your plate so you can focus on your day. Only available with TurboTax Live full service real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. Wrapping things up here on a defensive recap episode of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And I rattled off the pending free agents on Sunday's live post-game reaction. But here are the guys on the defensive side of the ball that are about to hit the open market. Lavonte David, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Bryce Hall, Mike Edwards, Anthony Nelson, Greg Gaines, KJ Britt, William Golston, Shaq Barrett, Tavierre Thomas, Ryan Neal, Troy Hill. Lavonte has to stay. If he wants to play another year, it needs to be in Tampa. This is not debatable. I will not hear anything contradicting that opinion because that opinion is a fact. If you don't like it, sorry, you're wrong. I don't think there's going to be anybody that disagrees with me on Lavonte David, but just in case, if you disagree with that opinion, you're wrong and you can deal with it. I'd also like to see Mike Edwards come back. Yes, he would be considered a backup, but there are plenty of opportunities to have him on the field with Antoine and Jordan. Not to mention, it gives you a starting caliber player that can step in for either one of those guys should they be injured again. Both of them dealt with a lot of injuries this year, and you hope that doesn't happen next year, but Mike Edwards gives you probably the best backup safety in the entire NFL, while he would also get plenty of opportunities to be on the field with the other two guys. It would be nice for Gaines, Nelson, and JTS to stay, but all in rotational roles, not as starters, especially Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. He is not a starting caliber edge rusher. He is really, really, really good depth. He is a really solid rotational guy. But I would love for those guys to return. It's not the end of the world if they don't. And then, sure, if Shaq Barrett wants to play and he's going to do it for cheap, he can be a rotational guy too. Bring him on back. That's cool. The rest, William Golston, KJ Britt, Tavierre Thomas, Ryan Neal, Troy Hill, they can go. They can. I love Golston. And again, if he wants to keep playing and he's going to do it on the cheap, go ahead, bring him back. That's fine. But these are not players that the Bucs need to go out of their way to ensure that they return. There needs to be a lot of changeover on the defensive side of the ball. And I didn't even bring up Bryce Hall because we don't really know what he offered. He got hurt in week 1. They could have used him, I'm sure, but he never really got to play with this team. So if he comes back, again, if it's on the cheap, sure, fine. Why not? Great depth. Not as a starter. Free agency, draft, trade, all of it needs to be centered and focused around the corners, the edge rushers, and the linebackers. Lavonte, if he returns, is not going to play forever. And once he's gone, that cupboard is bare. Servassier Dennis is not great at anything outside of rushing the passer and stopping the run. He is not a guy that's going to drop back into his own coverage. He is not a guy who's going to stay with a running back on a wheel route. He is not a guy that's going to cover the tight end coming over the middle. He's not Lavonte. Nobody is. But he's especially not that type of versatile, sideline to sideline, do everything kind of dude. That's not who he is. Move on from Jamel Dean. Get him out. You designate Jamel Dean, and I'm going to talk about this a ton in the offseason. This is not going to be the first or the last time that you hear these numbers, but you designate Jamel Dean as a post-June 1st cut like you did with Shaq Barrett last year. That's $2.3 million in dead cap and over $12 million in cap savings. That immediately doubles what your projected current cap space is. The Bucs are currently projected at a little over $11 million in cap space. Now, that's not for sure. We don't know what the official 2025 cap number is going to be, but that $11 million probably isn't too far off. And you're going to save more than that by designating Jamel Dean as a post-June 1st cut. Get him out. All due respect, I wish you the best of luck in all your future endeavors. Thank you for being a key cog in the wheel that won the Super Bowl, but get out. From there, it's draft and sign defense. You bring back Bredesen. You bring back Chris Godwin, maybe Shep, probably Robert Hainsey as a versatile depth piece. But from there, it's all defense. Of course, the other hurdle, the other issue that we have is that we don't know what the status of the coaching staff is going to be by time free agency rolls around. Liam Coen has already done one interview with the Jaguars and appears to be the front runner, or at least one of the front runners for that head coaching job. You have John Spytek and Mike Greenberg both having conducted interviews for GM openings. Spytek is in the mix in both Tennessee and now with the Raiders, with Tom Brady as one of the owners over there. Greenberg interviewed with the Jets. So you could have serious changes in the front office as well as the coaching staff. And if the Glazers and Jason Light have to make a decision of, do we let Coen walk out the door, or do we move on from Todd Bowles and we make Liam our head coach? Well, now we don't know who the defensive coordinator is. We don't know what kind of system he's going to run. We don't know what kind of personnel he's going to want. So that is a very fluid situation. If Liam leaves and Todd stays the head coach, we know exactly what kind of defense he wants. We know exactly what kind of personnel he wants. We know that they're going to finish 25th or worse against the pass in 2025. That's just kind of the long and short of it. Anybody looking for an offensive coordinator job is going to foam at the mouth looking at this offense, especially if you're bringing back Chris Godwin, especially if you're re-signing Ben Bredesen. With Mike and McMillan and Baker and Bucky, Cade, offensive coordinators are going to jump at the opportunity to coach that offense. Without Liam, I don't know if they're top 5 in total offense, rushing offense, passing offense, points per game. But they're, without a doubt, they're still top 10. Without a doubt, they're still a very difficult offense to match up with. But defensively, we don't know who Liam's potential defensive coordinator candidates would be if he ends up being the head coach. I still think at the end of the day, Todd Bowles is going to be the head coach next year. I would say it's a 60-40 chance that Liam Coen's still the offensive coordinator. And that 60% confidence in him staying is getting lower by the day. By Monday, we're probably talking about it's a coin flip, if we haven't already heard that he's gotten a head coaching job. So this offseason is for sure going to be an interesting one, and barring any major news on any of those fronts, we will be back on Monday with our end of season awards. I'm going to be giving out my awards for, MVP, offensive player of the year, defense player of the year, all those things, but all centered around the Bucs. I'm not going to talk for 5 minutes about whether or not the MVP should be Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson. I'm talking about the MVP for the Buccaneers. And then the insiders have voted on these as well. So we're going to hand out the insiders end of season awards. We're going to see if there's any kind of overlap there. We're also going to be starting mock draft Monday sooner than later. So Every Monday, I'm either going to be giving you my own mock draft. I'll be reacting to mock drafts from others, whether that's different websites, different media members, insiders sending me mocks, listeners and viewers sending me their mocks in the DMs on Twitter at Locked On Bucs. I'm going to do situational mock drafts like last year, where we force a certain position in the first round to see what a complete draft would look like, versus what a best player available in a position of need mock draft would look like. Lots of different variations, but we're going to start those probably before the end of the month. But that is going to do it for this episode. Please make sure you are following everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs. Become an insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with those notifications turned on, as well as your favorite podcast platform. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.